had ancient philosophy in my second year university. Say first year was a bit of a dumpster fire as far as studies. Say 61 in first year English. I don't think I got a B in any of my courses. Maybe I did. I might have gotten math. I didn't want to do math. But in second year university, I did philosophy, ancient philosophy, and I remember Socrates going around everyone saying, all I know is that I know nothing, basically. And going to the people reputed for their intelligence, the sophists, or reputed for knowledge in particular areas, and asking them then, saying, oh, and he would flatter them, but he wasn't really flattering them, he was saying to them what they thought about themselves. You know, you're reputed for knowing a lot about this subject. And they would say, oh yes, that's right, you've come to the right place. I'm the guy. And then he would say, well, you've got to help me then, because I don't understand this. And as the dialogue progresses, you find that the person who claimed to know nothing, or to know everything about the subject, was quickly pushed into a corner and ended up saying, well, I don't really know the answer to that. And they would do it in evasive ways. Sometimes they'd threaten to punch him in the nose. But eventually they would just sort of cry off the dialogue, and then Socrates would be left talking, which is pretty funny, I always thought. But the man who didn't know anything, and I actually didn't think it was a sort of a strategy for wearing people down, as a genuine inquiry about the nature of things. He really wanted to know, so he went to the people that said they knew about these things. And he came to it with humility, saying, I just don't understand this as well as I would like to. Can you help me? And then the dialogue would ensue, and at the end of it, out of that humble beginning, he ended up showing that he knew what the others didn't know. Or the others who said they knew something revealed that they didn't know it. And so where do we go from there? Does this make him the arch skeptic? I don't think so. But some adopted Socrates as a great skeptic for that reason. He debunked everyone else's claims to knowledge. I don't want to get into that. My point with this illustration is that Socrates was humble, and he learned out of that. So what I want to say for you as the take-home lesson, which is the in-class lesson, is if you don't know something, ask a question. Professing ignorance is a good way forward. It's not like you come to university, you're surrounded by people that sound like they know more than you do. I should. I'm getting paid for it. I should. And you don't, but I don't expect you to. That's why you're here. So if you don't understand something, you ask a question. And genuinely ask a question. And the atmosphere of inquiry should be encouraged, and that's how we do it. So in a lecture, I can talk all day long. Interrupt me with a question. But don't just do it willy-nilly. Think about what the question actually is that you really want to ask. And, you know, because a lot of people, when they come to ask a question, they talk for about a minute or 2 or 5, and they never get to the question. That's bad. But partly they're thinking while they're talking. That's how they come about it. One of the great gifts of university education is to be able to think what the best questions are and to come to them quickly. And that takes time. To be able to come to something quickly takes a lot of years of hard work, saying that's not the real question. There's a question beneath that and a question beneath that, and here's the real question. If you answer that question, then I know what comes after that. So it's burrowing down. Last time we concluded the Odyssey, and there was one last thing I wanted to say, which I thought as I walked out the door, which is that we left off with that episode with Odysseus being exposed by his wife Penelope. The wise Odysseus being tricked by his wife. And the trick was that she claimed that his bed was outside. Their bed was outside. And he was outraged because he said that bed could not be moved. I know because I built the bed and I built it into a tree stump, and tree stumps don't move. So unless one of the gods has moved this, what on earth? Outrage. Well, now in the process, he doesn't identify himself by name, but he has identified himself by his actions, which is the whole purpose of the Odyssey, is to reveal a man in his actions. Now he's been revealed by his clever, wise wife. But there's something else in there, and this is central to the epic. I think one of the messages of this, Odysseus was found on the island of Calypso in a place of bliss, potentially. But he wanted to be home with his family. So what? I mean, it's touching. It's connected with all sorts of other things, though, and that the metaphor of the marriage bed being a solid, immovable object in the middle of his kingdom is the direct opposite to the place that he was in Book 5. It was a floating island. It was always changing. It was not grounded in anything. The Odyssey is really promoting the importance of the family as a sort of a bastion of stability. You can go win prizes, you can bring them back, you can be reputed for fame, whatever. At the end of the day, he wanted to get back to that core thing. And in that, he's asserting what the Greeks would have thought about family, by the way. I say that because when we think about, so this light is really annoying. I'll turn it off for a second. When we think about the family in pagan societies, we often think of fertility rites and so forth, and lots of sexual transgressions and so forth, because that happens. But underlying all that, there is a sense in which the family unit is held to be sacrosanct. Still, in Roman thought, in Greek thought, likewise. It's just there. For all of the sexual liaisons outside of that, it's still, there's something that is held to be deeply rooting all things. I just note that for yourself, because it occurred to me after I left. But also it's helpful for today's class, because today's class moves from an epic, a long narrative poem, to a tragedy as a form of writing. And a tragedy is a play. And the play, of which we have one, we're going to look at Oedipus the king, Oedipus Rex in Latin, Oedipus Tyrannus, Oedipus the tyrant in Greek, is part of a 3-part cycle. It would have been performed alongside 2 other plays, Oedipus at Colonus and, what's her name? I've just drawn a blank. Anyway, and it would have been performed in a competition. Mistakenly called a trilogy, but they're 3 plays that take, with some time lapse between them, interconnected in many ways. And this particular one has at the heart of it a sexual transgression. And not of any garden nature transgression. It's not adultery. We're talking about incest here. And at the instance of incest that took place in Thebes, Thebes being the city at the center of the play, was so notorious that it's mentioned in the Underworld of Homer's Odyssey, which most people think is written about 800 BC, thereabouts. And so it's at whatever we make of the timeline for the Battle of the Trojan War, that's probably about 1200 BC, thereabouts. It's still, even if it's 800 BC, is talking about an event in the ancient past that is so horrid it's talked about in the Underworld. In Homer, this is 400 years later. So there is a taboo here that is at stake, which has been breached and is so heinous that the gods are going to punish it. It becomes infamous. It's also centered around the character of Teiresias. Let me say one final thing, and this is to correct myself. I said that last time, the Greek underworld didn't have the Elysian fields. It's not true. They are there in the Greeks. It's already there. And there are punishment, and there are three, one by Rhadamanthus and two of the others who are there to administer justice. So there is punishment in the underworld, and there is sort of reward. It's just the reward is pretty underwhelming. They certainly don't go to heaven. They're in the underworld. It's a shadowy existence, and for all of its, Achilles would be one of the blessed in the underworld. We heard what he said last time. I would rather live a good long life as a slave than be down here. So that's how bad it is in the underworld, even for those who are good, virtuous characters. It's nothing like heaven. The Elysian fields are not heaven. It's just a less bad underworld, right? So I wanted to correct myself on that, because I misled you when I answered that question. I don't know what I was thinking. But the events here appear to have taken place in the sense that they're part of Greek folklore. That's not based on nothing. Like the story of what happened at Thebes. The Thebans become infamous because of this episode. But what makes the play so interesting is that it's as much about insight as anything. The story of Thebes is famous, infamous. Everyone knows about the story of Thebes and what happened there. Likewise, this whole story, and this is one of the things that is also a bit shocking to contemporary audiences when I talk about this, is that the events told about in Troy and elsewhere are so well known, they don't just learn about them as you are for the first time in a classroom. It's already well known. And the storyteller is distinguishing himself as a storyteller by the way he tells the story, not by inventing new features of the story, by inventing things. It's really building on something that's already there. And how do I present this so that the true meaning of that event is brought to the audience? And that's what Sophocles will be renowned for. By the way, let me just say something about tragedy. I said it was part of a festival. It is. It's an annual form. And it's dedicated to the god Dionysus. Dionysus is known as Bacchus, sometimes the wine god, associated with sexual orgies as well. I don't know what goes on around the tragic festivals, but may well be. You know, something about the thespians, the theaters, and that sort of lifestyle. But these are genuinely performances, and they are competitions. We think about the Olympic Games. We still have Olympic Games, right? Once every 4 years, which we inherited from the Greeks, although it was revived in 1896. They brought them back as worldwide competitions. Here it's an all Greek competition. It's not the whole world comes, it's all people from all over Greece are in Olympic Games. Likewise, they have these tragedies, and these tragedies are performed after in Athens and so forth. It's a festival, and it's a festival of the arts, but it's a competition. Sophocles is one of the three great tragedians. The others are a man by the name of Aeschylus, who's the eldest of Sophocles, our man here. And then the third is Euripides. These are the three great tragedians. There are more, but they all do something with the genre. This one we're doing because Aristotle says it's the finest tragedy. He uses it, he says it's an exemplary tragedy. That's his judgment as a philosopher. And it's because it really is about insight. There's a failure of thought that goes on that leads to the tragedy. I'm not sure it's exemplary or the best tragedy on some other fronts, but for a philosopher, for a thinker, this is the tragedy par excellence. And Aristotle, I'll talk about this next time a little bit more, comes up with certain observations about the nature of tragedy, and he specifically says that this tragedy illustrates his point. So I'll look at that next time. I'll put it up on our course website, and we'll go some of the features of it. But he uses certain words that we still use in English, like catharsis and hubris. You heard of hubris before? Arrogance, pride. Catharsis is a purging. People talk about cathartic experiences. There are other words which he also uses, which you might recognize or might not. One of them you will recognize if you do any New Testament Greek. It's hamartia. A word he uses in reference to the play. In Greek, it's one of the 4 words in the New Testament used for sin. And so there's a whole branch of theology called Hamartology. It's related to the doctrine of sin. In Aristotle, it refers to missing the mark. So hamartia is when you shoot an arrow at a target and you miss the target entirely. It's not only you don't hit a bullseye, you miss the target. You shot off. There's a point in the play which is a hamartia. Anyway, I'll get to that next time. Sophocles wrote about 120 plays. We have 7 of them. Same sort of thing can be said of Aeschylus and Euripides. They would have written a lot of plays, most of them tragedies, and we don't have many left, so nothing can be said about that. But it is interesting to see what has been preserved, and as I say, many of the events that are in the tragic writers are referring to events that are also mentioned in the epics. Let me put this on the screen. Let me say, just to show you something about the theater. This is the theater. The words from the Greek theater in Greek are the same words that are still used to this day about Greek theater. Greek theater is the basis of modern theater, even in terms of structure. When I talk about structure, this is what I have in mind. You see this? This is this. This is down here, down below, right here. So the theatron is looking at it from the other side. The word theatro there comes from the Greek word to observe. So these are the spectators. In Latin spectare, they're the theater. These are the spectators, and they're looking down at the scene, the skene, right? And then there's the orchestra down below, and they're playing and they're dancing down below. Okay, so there's it from the one side. There's it from the other side. So there's the skene there, and there is the orchestra down here, and here is the theatron. They're outside, performed outside. And the characters down here on stage can be heard at the back, outside. Why? Because of perfect acoustics. It's the stone, it's the pitch of the gradient of the steps. It's all been mathematically observed so that the acoustics are perfect. It can't be bettered. This still exists. There are some of these theaters. They're in some disarray, but like the beautiful backdrop and so forth, you go out and watch a performance. And it's built there in stone, so of course they're not going to pack up. It's Greece, so the weather's pretty good. In the summer, it's pretty blistering, in fact. But that's what we're looking at here. And the terms used in drama are retained. So the theater itself, the word for it, the scene, the chorus, all these things are directly taken from ancient Greek drama and used to this day. We'll find the exact same thing in philosophy. The schools of philosophy, the terminology of philosophy has been held on to, and it largely defines the whole discipline. There's a reason why we go back to the Greeks, and why the Romans went to the Greeks, and why everybody else thereafter. they use the terms. We can talk about whether we agree or disagree on certain things, but largely the terms are laid down for us. You don't need to see this anymore. As I say, we only have about 7. Performed at a Dionysian competition. And there is a choric dance that goes along with the tragedy, goes along with it. Now, where the word tragedy comes from, some people think that a tragos is a goat. And so those that were performing wore boots that made a sound on the stage, a clopping sound, like a goat making a noise. In comedies, they wore soft heeled shoes that made no noise, like slippers. They don't make a noise. Tragedies, they're clopping around the stage. So there's a performative element. Oh, one final thing. When we think of tragedies, we think of great suffering for good reason. We also think of wanting to see somebody's face when they're suffering. Films will and TV will particularly magnify it, like show me your anguish. In this theater, they're all wearing masks. You can't see their faces. You don't need to be beautiful to be an actor. Like Hollywood movies, they're particularly stunning. Usually, right? That's the thing that makes them actors. They can't act usually, but they look good. A few of them can act, but not many. They're terrible actors, but they look great. And you can do voiceovers and whatever. Whereas here, it's all about your voice. It's all voice, because you've got the mask on. And what the mask does, because it's made of wood, it has a fixed expression on it, and the fixed expression is the emblem of the person behind it, more or less. And what the mask does is it amplifies your voice. Can you hear me better now? I'm not talking any louder, but it is, right? So that's what it does. It projects the voice outwards and upwards. But it also allows you to see, to some degree, what's going on in stage. But actually, the visual spectacle is almost wholly insignificant. It's what you're hearing. That's what the drama is about. It's what you're hearing. You're not going to see Oedipus's face. Or in the other, you want to say that's Oedipus and that's not. But aside from that, it's not about what you're seeing, it's about what you're hearing. Very much about almost an audio spectacle. You don't gain very much from watching Oedipus that you wouldn't get from a radio play. Because it's really about language and about what's going on there and the conflict there. I could talk about the features of the tragedy. I'm not going to get into all that. But there is a tragic hero in this who makes a hamartia, a tragic error, a fatal flaw. He has a fatal mistake. And it is a perfect combination of form and content, this particular tragedy. And it surrounds a figure whose name is Oedipus, who claims his fame resides in the fact that he is regarded as a prophetic figure. Where does he get that reputation? Because he solved the riddle of the Sphinx. You know what a Sphinx is? Sphinx. You see them in Egypt. Head of a man, body of a lion, composite figure. The Sphinx is destroying Thebes as Oedipus rides on the theme. What's the Sphinx doing, and why is he destroying it? Because of some terrible action. He's punishing Thebes. Why is he punishing Thebes? Well, actually because of the incest. But we can leave that aside. There's a riddle that he's asking. If you don't answer the riddle, the Sphinx is going to destroy you. So you get an opportunity. Think of Bilbo and Gollum. You get a riddle. You get 3 guesses. What's in my pockets is. Except you don't get 3 guesses here. You get 1. And the riddle is, what walks around on 4 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 in the evening? And Oedipus gets the answer right. It's a man, right? Babies crawl, a man walks upright. By the time you're in old age, then you have to use a cane to get around. Gets the answer right. The Sphinx is destroyed. He's the savior of the city. He comes into the city as the hero, and not just the hero, he finds that the city has no king. It has not had a king for a long time. And as a consequence, we saw this with Odysseus, the city's in disarray. Injustice reigns in the city. This is a problem. And they ask him to become king. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means marrying the queen. Okay, I like the look of her. There's something familiar about that lady. I really like the look of her. And then the tragedy ensues and almost completes at that point. Certainly the prophecy that was given early on is fulfilled. Now we're going to find out about what the prophecy is only later in the story. It starts off just a bit like the Odyssey. It begins in the middle of things. The city of Thebes is under assault, and there's a plague, and the gods are destroying, and Apollo is particularly angry at them. He's destroying them because of the miasma of the sin that's polluted the city. It's so scandalous that there's nothing Apollo can do besides destroy the city. And people flock to Odysseus or Oedipus to ask him to save them. At the moment that Oedipus marries his mother, he simultaneously becomes a pharmakos. Pharmakos. You ever heard of pharmakos? What does it sound like? Pharmacy. What do you do at a pharmacy?
Medicine.
You get medicine. He's a sort of a medicine. He's a medicine that's going to cure what ails him. But ancient medicines are often like modern medicines. They inoculate you with a little bit of the poison that's plaguing you. And it has this dual sense. It's a poison and it's a cure. Which one is it? So there's a lot of ambiguity surrounding this. Now, he is the cure to what originally plagued them. He solves the riddle of the Sphinx through his wisdom. But he also simultaneously then goes on, marries the queen, and then has children with her, committing incest because that's mom. And he didn't realize it. He didn't realize that was his mother. In fact, that's why he fled his former city. He fled that because he heard the prophecy that this would take place, and he thought, I'm going to do anything to prevent that from happening, even if it means leaving my family, leaving mom and dad. I will not murder my father and marry my mother. In other words, I would say he's an ordinary man, but he's not a bad man. He's a good man. He doesn't want that to happen. His parents, whose names are Jocasta and what's his father's name? Laios, L-A-I-O-S, Laios and Jocasta. They also heard the prophecy that their child would do this to them. And they also wanted to avoid that outcome. Right? Prophecy comes, your child is going to murder you and is going to commit incest with you. And they say, God forbid that from ever happening. What do? They give the child over to a herdsman and they say, expose the child and let the child die. We will not let this happen. Go sacrifice the child. You know, we're not going to cut him up. This is our child. We can't do this ourselves. But you herdsman, you go and you expose the child and just set him out where the wild animals will take him. This is what they did in the ancient world with unwanted children. The Romans did it. There was a place where the dogs were just waiting for the kids to be set out, because it was the regular place where the kids got put that were not wanted. It's mealtime. Terrible. Yeah. But in both cases, the parents, the prophets say this is going to happen. The parents say, we're going to stop that from happening because it's so terrible. Oedipus hears this is going to happen, and he says, I don't want that to happen. I'm going to seek to avoid it as well. In both cases, what has been fated happens against the best wishes of those who are trying to avoid the fate. What is the lesson? Fate is fate. This is the state, this is the human condition. You can't change your fate. The gods can't change the fate. We saw that already. The Olympian gods can't change what's fated. You're fated to do this terrible deed, and it's going to happen. And if you think you're smart enough or good enough to avoid this, you are gravely mistaken, because that is the nature of life. You are locked in. You have free will in the sense you can make choices, but that's not going to change your fate. It's a fatalistic world that they live in. And it has nothing to do with whether you're a good person or a bad person. It just is so. And what's the consequence of that view for the way people live their lives? Well, it's that they are not going to seek to change their circumstances. Because this is the way it is. If you're a slave, you stay a slave. And think that you may not like it and you can uprise, but at the end of the day, that's who you are. That's your identity. Likewise, kings. But on the other hand, they're also aware that there is this circular pattern to life, which means those at the top can always be brought down. We see this going all the way back to the account of the gods themselves. I mentioned this last time. Jupiter, or Zeus, rebels against Saturn, or Kronos, and brings about a pattern of downfall which gets repeated. Rebellions against those that are higher by those lower, and so on. And the world gets worse and worse and worse until we get to the point where there's a possible return to a golden age. But it's a circle. It's the circle of life without the cheesy Lion King song. But it's a wheel that you cannot break. There's no redemption. But what there it can be is a scapegoat. And that is what this man, Oedipus, becomes. He becomes a scapegoat for the whole city. They're going to drive him out, just like in Scripture. It was said on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, you take one animal and you sacrifice it. Here are the way, and the other, you lay the hands of the high priest on the scapegoat, and then you drive him into the wilderness. He's a scapegoat for the city. He's going to bear the sins of his city. There's a sort of a ritualistic thing about there. Now, how does that fit with Dionysus? Well, again, Dionysus is the god of the harvest. He's also torn apart, and he gets reincarnated every year. So there's some deep meanings underlying the whole thing. But he doesn't know who he is. Now, here's another irony. His name is Oedipus. Now, I can get this up now. Which is good. I don't have to walk all the way. Oida, I see, I know. I see, I know. Who? What? What do I see, what do I know? His name's Oedipus. Means swollen foot as well, possibly. But it could also be a play on his name in the sense that he claims to be able to see and know things. He claims that he has a greater insight than the blind prophet Teiresias. He is blind. And Oedipus says, you have no idea what you're talking about. Teiresias says, you have no idea who you even are. There's a riddle surrounding not just the Sphinx, but who Oedipus is. This is a play about the identity of Oedipus, and to some degree about human nature. I would, who are we? Do we really know who we are? There's a lot of talk about identity, self-identifying, this sort of stuff in our day. I talked to you about this in a previous class. It's an impossible question for a human being to answer who they are, because they don't have the knowledge necessary. And you talk about superficial characteristics, but who you are individually is an impossible question for you to answer. You'd have to know everything about yourself, and you'd have to know the essence of who you are to answer the question. But you can't figure out the essence of yourself because you only can talk about superficial characteristics, like the fact whether you got dark hair or blonde hair or no hair or eyes, color, all that sort of stuff. Birth date, those are all statistically measurable, observable, but that's not who you are. It doesn't describe your nature. To get that, it has to be revealed to you by the person who made you. Right? The creator. That's Augustine when he asks the question of human nature. Comes up, he says, who am I? Or the question from God says, who are you? And he says, I don't know, you know, God, you made me. He says, I'm a riddle to myself. Because I think about it in terms of the way Paul talks about it in Romans 7. He says, the things that I don't want to do, I do. And the things that I do want to do, I don't do. This is a problem. You like to think that you're in control of your life. You know, nobody can tell me what to do, whatever. You can't tell yourself what to do, apparently. Because you don't do things that you want to do, the good things, and you do the things, the bad things, you don't want to do. This is a serious problem. So it's not just that you're a sinner, it's that you can't solve the riddle of human existence on your own. It's not possible because there are too many contradictions. And Oedipus seems to me to exemplify this. He claims to be, well, he's the king of Thebes. He solves the riddle of the Sphinx, and yet he doesn't even know who he is. And the blind prophet Teiresias does know who he is. And now, so we get a conflict between two figures. One, a famous prophet who we met down in the Underworld in the Odyssey. The other, an infamous king of Thebes, also mentioned in the Odyssey as a man so horrid that the gods cursed him. In both cases, they were fated in everything they did. So you'd say, well, what's the point of blaming them then? Because they did a bad thing. That's why. But could they have done otherwise? Nope. Should they be punished? Yes. Otherwise, there's no justice. But is their personhood not contradicted by the fact that they had no choice in it? The Greeks don't care. And neither do you. If somebody commits a terrible act against you, you want punishment. You want justice. How deep does the justice go? Only Christianity is going to go so deep with the question of justice. It's going to recognize that you are a sinner by nature, not accidentally like Oedipus. Oedipus committed sin. There's no doubt about it. Everyone recognizes him as the man of sin. He does a terrible thing. But do the others do it? They blame him for it. They put the scapegoat, they blind, he's driven out of the city. He's not like one of us. Yes, the Bible says that each person is a sinner. And then it says that God himself reveals that to us, that we are sinners, and he sent a Savior to atone for it. And there's an identification that goes on there because God becomes a human being. No identification here. Here it's the exact opposite. He's not like one of us. Get him out. Blame him, he's gone. Scapegoating, call it. In the Christian take on this, God identifies with sinners. Not because he sins, but because he takes on their sins on himself. He becomes the scapegoat. He gets driven outside the camp. By the way, he's crucified outside the city, right by the garbage dump, which is called hell. That's what they call it. It's fire burns all day long. It's always burning the garbage. That's a symbol of hell in the Valley of Hinnom, where they used to sacrifice babies. That's the city garbage dump for Jerusalem. That's the fire of hell referred to there. It's a symbol. Doesn't mean that it's not a reality either, but that's where Christ is crucified, outside the city. So there's a lot of comparisons, but there's more that's said by Christianity about human nature than is ever settled here. Here we have Oedipus saying he's not like one of us, but he's bad and he needs to be punished. We all agree with that. But you want to push this further into who we are, and I think you get a very different answer come Christianity. Yes, sir. No. Yeah, before he committed the action of murdering his father? No, you got to read the play. Plainly haven't read it. No, he has no idea. So in biblical law, a person who commits murder accidentally, not unintentionally, it's called manslaughter. Right? You've killed somebody, but it's not first degree premeditated murder. I set out and I'm looking to get you. Right? And I'm waiting for you and I'm going to murder you and then I do it. That's considered a greater offense than you ran in front of my car. I couldn't stop because you ran in front of my car and I hit you. I still killed you. Vehicular homicide, right? Somebody still died. An injustice has happened. Somebody has just lost a father or a brother or a person has died and you've done it. You're guilty. You killed the person. Are we going to prosecute you in the same way? He hits his father. He doesn't know it's his father, and he doesn't even mean to kill him, as it turns out. But he didn't actually intend to kill his father. He killed some guy that hit him first. His father is up from a height, and he has a cane, and he reaches out, and it's got teeth in it, and he hits his son on the head, and the teeth dig into his skull, and he just reaches up and plows him and kills him, hits him. That's a pretty big hit. But he responded to the hit, so normally you wouldn't even have said, it was an accident. It just so happens that he was the king, and it just so happens that he was his father. But he didn't know that. So are you really going to blame him for the gravity of the offense that's held against him? Well, yes, because he then goes on to the city and marries his mother and commits incest and has children with her. He doesn't know any of that, though. So again, how are you holding him responsible? So are you saying that incest should go unpunished? Of course you're not. You can't tolerate incest. No society can tolerate incest. He's rightly punished. But is it just that he does so? Yes, it is. It's still just. It's not fair. That's a different thing altogether. That's a standard of justice above justice. You're appealing to a standard that they have no access to. Somebody has got to pay for it. And Oedipus is going to have to pay for this. He becomes a proverbial scapegoat. In a sense, he's suffering more than he deserves. And yet, he deserves every bit of it. The reason you object to it is we think that our intentions matter in justice, which they do in biblical law. But that is not the case here. The category of my intentions is something that Christianity reveals. and the Bible reveals, which is that the Lord looks on the heart of a man. The 10th commandment is against coveting. You can't see somebody else coveting. You can see somebody doing the first 9 commandments. Those are externally observed. You can say, I didn't do that, I didn't do that, I did that, I did that. But coveting, everybody covets. Jesus even says that the origin of the other sins is coveting. Committing adultery. If you looked at another man's wife with lust in your heart, you've committed that sin even. And Paul says that's how he knew he was a sinner, because he coveted. Kept all the other ones, but he couldn't stop doing that, so he was a sinner, in other words. We expect our intentions to be a factor in it. It's not quite so differentiated in this. And even if it is, the fact remains that he still murdered a man who also happened to be his father, who also happened to be the king, and you can't just say, well, you didn't mean it. Punishment has to happen. It has to happen. So when you say, but is this a satisfactory explanation of everything that we want to be done about justice? No, is the answer. But only at the cross will you get that answer. Only there. Where justice and mercy meet. Right? Anyway, the prologue is brilliant. The priest refers to Oedipus as the first of men. The chorus, by the way, and the priest are on Oedipus's side. The chorus probably represents the city. They love Oedipus. He's their hero. He saved them. They're fully supportive of him, and they want him to help them. They're sort of an idealized spectator. If you noticed in your text, I left mine at home, unfortunately, you will see that when it comes to the chorus speaking, the meter is different. It's set off in a different form. And it's a lyric form, and there's a dance going on, and they're shuffling around in one direction and the other, and they're singing and chanting as they do it. Sort of a ritualistic thing. So a dance is a part of that, and again, they're wearing the boots, and there's a going around in the circle. And there's irony here introduced from the outset. Now, irony, dramatic irony, is when the character says something and the audience is aware that there's more meaning to the person's words who said it than the character who said it realizes. So what's the irony here? Oedipus says he's sicker than all of them. You say you're sick and you're dying. I'm sicker than all of you. This is what politicians say. I feel your pain. I feel it more deeply than you do. In this case, he says that he's sicker than all of them, and that's entirely true, because he's the murderer, parricide, committed incest. He's sicker than all of them. In fact, he's the cause of all this. So he says that he's sicker than all of them, and he says that he will prove a villain if he doesn't do what the God says, which is to avenge himself on this. He will prove the villain. Well, he will prove the villain. There's a lot of irony throughout the play. And what's fascinating is that the audience, in fact, everybody knows better about who Oedipus is than Oedipus. Oedipus is the most ignorant man in the entire play. The audience knows who Oedipus is from the beginning. He was in Homer's Underworld, infamous for his deeds. He doesn't know it. Jesus says that we can see we can see sins in other people's eyes like a log, and the sin in our own eye is a speck. And he says, well, first take the log. He flips around. First take the log out of your own eye before you point out the speck in your brother's eye. You don't see your own sin, but everyone else sees it in technicolor. It's really obvious somebody else's sin, but not to them. They don't see it. They see everybody else's sin. Likewise with Oedipus, he is a blind man. although his eyes work. He can't see it. The rest of them can't see it at first. They will go through phases of awareness. The last person to figure out is Oedipus. So there's two parts to this mystery. His brother-in-law Creon, he also says, by the way, another instance of irony, he says he will act in his own interest in finding the murderer. It's not just for you. I'm going to do it for my own sake. I'm going to find out who this murderer is. And he says that he will not rest. No matter what, he is going to get this murderer and he will drive him out of the city. He will not allow the sin to go unpunished. No, even if it comes back to himself. So he's, right? Even if it comes back to my own family, to me, I will still pursue this investigation to its end. I don't care where the finger points. Even if it's at me, I will do it. His brother-in-law Creon comes in and says that there are two parts of the mystery, or we see that there are two parts. First is that of the murderer. Who is the murderer? And the second is who Oedipus himself is. We find out that the former king, whose name was Laos, was murdered at a place where three roads met. And he was murdered by many men. Not everything in that account is true. It was a three-pronged road, but it was only one man who did it. So part of the information is false. But this is the story. The story is that Laos was murdered at a crossroads. And when he hears that, he sort of shudders because he remembers killing a man at exactly that sort of place. But he dismisses it because, well, there are many murderers? Yes. Oh, okay. Well, wasn't me. Couldn't be. There were many murderers. I killed that man, but, and the three road where three roads intersect. Yeah. Okay. So not me, that. He wants to get to the bottom of it. Who shall we ask or find who will help us solve the mystery that is at hand? Who's reputed for wisdom? Teiresias. Let's call Teiresias. Let me say something about Pyreesius. I didn't say this last time. I don't think I did. There are all sorts of myths and legends surrounding Teiresias. But one of them is that he was asked to adjudicate. Remember I said that the whole of the Iliad began with this contest between the goddesses, who's the most beautiful, right? As I say, when goddesses have contests and you're the man in the situation, it's sort of like, do I look fat in this? You don't want to answer that question. You can never get that right. You have to find a way out of that question. It's the same thing here. The goddesses come along. She's saying, "Oh, so never mind." They say which of the two, male or female, enjoys the sex act more, a male or a female? A god and a goddess ask the question. No matter how he answers it, one of them is going to be angry at him. Doesn't want to answer the question. They say, you're going to answer the question. How do they make him answer the question? They make him both sexes. They make him androgynous. He becomes a woman, he becomes a man. Androgyny is associated with prophecy in the ancient world and in pagan cults, including in the tribes of this country and so forth. Androgyny is a sort of a pagan sexual ideal. I just observe it. How did this come about? Well, there were two snakes copulating. He struck the one. He was turned into a woman. He struck it again, and he was turned back into a man. He knows the wisdom of both sexes, so he knows the answer to the question. There's some weird stuff going on there, but he's associated with that, and he is struck blind for his answer. By the goddess. She strikes him blind. The god rewards him by giving him wisdom. You are the most wise of all men. The goddess is angered and strikes him blind. So he gets there's an upside, there's a downside. The upside is that you are the wisest of men. The downside is that you're blind. Oedipus comes to Teiresias and with the problem. Remember, and this is clear from what I've said already, he's not really responsible for his actions. It's fated. But he makes mistakes, and the mistakes are that he kills his father and he marries his mother. Why? Because he lacks insight. He doesn't really see what's going on. It's not an innate fault in him. It's a curse on his family by the gods. The gods have cursed him. Well, how can you blame him then if the gods have cursed him for it? You can't really. But something is being said by the Greeks about the human condition here. Whether we want to do well, it doesn't matter. If the gods curse us, we're cursed. There's no escape from that. And all that can be done then is to destroy the person that's cursed. Now, there is something that he does, or could be held guilty for, and that is that he tries to aspire beyond his limits. And this is the contest with Pyreesius. He claims to be more wise than the prophet. It's a contest of wills, as it were. Who is the wisest amongst us? Pardon me. Teiresias' wisdom is divine. It comes from the gods. They speak to him. Whereas Oedipus uses knowledge and reason, his insight. He's a very wise man, very brilliant, admirable. Which is going to win this contest? There is no contest, the gods. So remember, this is a play at the festival of Dionysus, which is upholding the wisdom of the gods. When Oedipus comes to him and asks him, why is the city being plagued? Teiresias knows immediately and says, I don't want to tell you. And Oedipus is outraged and says, you can stop the curse and the destruction of the city, and you won't reveal the name of the person who did this? What's wrong with you? And he starts to get angry, and he starts abusing him. And he says that he's not a prophet at all, and that he's blind, and that he knows nothing, and he's just abusive in his language. And there's a back and forth that goes on there, lines 390 thereabouts. And he comes close to telling him the truth. You know, you are the cause. But he's so angry he won't even tell him. You know, he says, I can see. If I can see, then I can know. He trusts what he can see. Oida, fu, I see. First meaning. Second meaning is I know. On the basis of what I see, I know. The blind prophet can't see, and yet he does know. There's the discrepancy there. So there's an enormous gulf between the appearances and the reality of the situation. And the blind man can see, and the man with eyes is metaphorically blind. And so there's this conflict that comes up, and eventually it goes on a little bit, and finally Oedipus pushes Teiresias to the point where he pops and says, you are the problem. You, Oedipus, you are why the city is being destroyed. You, he blames him. And he's being actually 100% accurate. He is the reason for it. Oedipus thinks that he's just striking back at him, blame shifting, right? You said, they go back and forth, you did it, no, you did it, back, that sort of thing. And he's not, no, you are the problem. You are the curse. You are the reason why the city is being destroyed. You don't even know who you are. You don't even know. You think you know what the problem is. You don't even know who you are. So again, this play is about the tragedy that takes place in Thebes. But really, it's about the riddle of human nature. That's how I see the play. And the 455 thereabouts, and at 436, why don't you look in your notes afterward, Oedipus starts to express anxiety about the identity of his parents. Because we find out a story took place. And what was the story? And how did this whole thing get orchestrated? We find out, and this comes a little bit later, we're going to spend another class on this, but we find out that he was sent away to be destroyed. He was left to the elements. The shepherd took pity on him and handed him over to another shepherd who just happened to be going in the direction of Corinth. He just couldn't bring himself to do it. Yeah. Well, you take the boy away and that'll be the end of it. He does. He goes there and he is adopted by the king and queen of Corinth. He's brought up as their child. They don't tell him. Somebody jokes about it. There's a party, somebody gets drunk, somebody says, you're not who you think you are. You're not the son of the king and queen of Corinth. You're a bastard, whatever. And he's furious about this. But he's so, in his fury, he's not so deluded that he doesn't think there's something true about what they've said. And he goes to find the truth. And where does he go? He goes to the oracle at Delphi, the famous Delphic oracle. You heard of the Delphic oracle? Mentioned in Scripture. He goes to the Delphic oracle for revelation wisdom. The Delphi is the Pythoness, dedicated to Apollo. She speaks for Apollo. She sends him the wrong direction in order to destroy him. Says, don't go, he tries to flee. Yes, that's not your father and mother. He finds out, but at this point he thinks it is, and the Delphic oracle won't tell him and misleads him. In the end, he goes back in the direction where he ought not to have gone. Let me pick that up next time. I think I'm running out of time here, but I will pick it up next time. But I'll pick it up at this moment with the Delphic oracle, and I'll see you then. Oh, stop there.